Hello, my name is Alex Didier. Today I'm presenting a presentation called Figured-Bach versus Rameau-nal harmony, legacy of the horizontal and the vertical in tonal theory. Essentially, I'm comparing two of the most notable 18th century music theorists that have considerably influenced the field of music theory till this day. The horizontal and vertical aspect shall be explained hopefully throughout the presentation. But in a nutshell, it's do we understand harmony as a single block chord moving from the next block chord, or do we understand harmony as an expansive uh, set of figures that unfolds over time? So, what is tonality? Tonality has long since been understood as a means to differentiate the harmonic organization in a vast array of musical styles. Yet the way that theorists have come to understand how tonal music functions has historically been divided into two traditions, the horizontal and the vertical. These differing styles of analysis can be credited in many ways to the work of the two 18th century theorists that I have just previewed, John Philipp Rameau and Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, aka CPE Bach. Let's Mr. John Philipp Rameau was the French composer and music theorist, born in Dijon, France in 1683 and died in Paris, France in 1764. His work is regarded by many as being quite profound. However, he was not quite recognized by his contemporaries for his achievements during his own lifetime. And I believe this might have been because of the amount of work he put out and the difficulty that it was perhaps to understand for the average theorist or music enthusiast. His treatise on harmony, or Traité de l'harmonie in French, was first published in 1722. And this is the version that I have here, as you can see on the screen, translated with an introduction and notes by Philip Gossett. Mr. Carl Philipp Emanuel, aka CPE Bach, son of Johann Sebastian Bach, born in Weimar, Germany in 1714, died in Hamburg, Germany in 1788. Unlike Rameau, CPE Bach was recognized in his own lifetime by his contemporaries. He was certainly praised by Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. Haydn, in particular, happens to be his most, CPE Bach himself proclaimed that it was Haydn who truly mastered his technique and understood it the most. Here's his treatise, which I have as well. Essay on the True Art of Playing Keyboard Instruments. Versuch über die Art, das Klavier zu spielen. First published in two parts, part one in 1753, part two in 1762. So, as I begin to explain the difference between what we can understand as vertical and horizontal harmony, I'd like to mention that it's Bach, CPE Bach, that outlines this sort of ground rules to analyze tonal music horizontally. And as far as that goes, that's specific to voice leading, one voice to the next. And Rameau's understanding of harmony, like I mentioned before, is vertical. His source of dissonance is generated within the chord, and the chord itself moves. Okay. One of the main concepts which Rameau and Figured-Bach explain in a drastically different context is the notion of cadence. The number of cadences and the role they play in what we could call a typical phrase model informs one of a given piece's level of depth or hierarchical structure. Rameau's treatise focuses on the concept of fundamental bass and the inversions of chords. His interest in building chords and the relation each note has to one another within a chord is what drives his notion of vertical harmony. In his description of the dominant, 5/7 in this case, or any case, which makes up the first half of his perfect cadence, he notes that the seventh, formed by adding a minor third to the perfect chord of the dominant, forms a dissonance not only with this dominant, but also with the major third of this same dominant, so that the major third forms a new dissonance here with regard to the added seventh. Here Rameau refers to the interval of a diminished fifth created from the third and flat seven of the dominant. The difference between Rameau's concept of dissonance and Figured-Bach's is how that dissonance is generated. Rameau suggests the dominant, in this case a 5/7, contains the entire allotment of dissonance and a vertical snapshot, if you will, which must then be resolved. Dissonance, therefore, exists within a single chord for Rameau. As you can see here, he explains that the seventh or minor dissonance versus the leading tone or major dissonance is then resolved, and the dissonance is held within the chord. He also explains that the dominant dominates the tonic, unlike other understandings where the tonic sort of is dominant, if you will. Figured-Bach, on the other hand, explains dissonance as the result of the motion between two distinct voices in the contrapuntal tradition. Figured-Bach's explanation of cadential dissonance would ultimately be expanded upon and championed by Heinrich Schenker, who makes his stance on horizontal and vertical harmony quite clear. Schenker, who was most certainly in favor of harmony as a horizontal concept, describes Rameau and his lackluster French musical taste as having shunned the horizontal in favor of the vertical. So it became Rameau's sorry task in life to lure the musical ear away from voice leading. I believe that Schenker's criticism can sometimes sound a little bit harsh, though he does have a valid critique. Rameau talks about how a perfect cadence can be labeled at every instance of a 5/7 progression to 1. Schenker rightly asks, why is it that if generation of content is solely a matter of the vertical axis and its cadences, why, if this is so, do these self-same cadences left to their own devices give rise to a perpetuum mobile? Why don't they move? Where does the impetus come from ever to bring a composition to a close? Essentially, how come one cadence can be more important than the next? What is the final cadence, and how is that actually more important than any other cadence? As I have shown here, Rameau explains the concept of the perfect cadence, stating that the perfect cadence is a certain way of ending a strain, which is so satisfying that we desire nothing further after it. That much I believe Figured-Bach, Schenker, and any who favor the horizontal would be on board with. However, as we see in Rameau's analysis of an excerpt borrowed from Zarlino, he labels two perfect cadences back to back, shown here, as if they were mini phrases. It seems that there is an inconsistency in Rameau's definition as his application of cadence. Why then, if he understands the perfect cadence as being so satisfying that we desire nothing further after it, does there seem to be an identical cadence labeled right after the first one? Why would Zarlino's example have anything after the first cadence if the ear desired nothing further? Granted, Rameau's notion of cadence moving from a 5/7 to 1 motion is the same as why Bach would understand, same way Bach would understand. The generous number of these instances are found in Rameau's method renders them all equally important, telling us little about the phrase structure, meaning if there's a million different cadences and they're all equally important, then we have no way of defining what formal boundaries become weighted heavier. Schenker's firm stance against Rameau's notion of vertical harmony may have been due to the great number of French composers using extended harmony with 9th and 11th chords during his time. However, this division was present during the time that C.P.E. Bach wrote his treatise as well. Schenker conveniently reminds us of a quote from C.P.E. Bach's letter sent to Kernberger, reading, "You may state publicly that my principles and those of my late father are antithetical to Rameau's," meaning the opposite. There seems to be a staunch division between the German and French understanding of tonal harmony. However, neither system can explain all forms of music. Rameau's notion of building the minor triad from nature using arithmetic proportions of 2, 3, 4, and 5 and 6 times as long as the given fundamental also influenced Hugo Riemann, who also understood the minor triad as an inversion of the major triad. Had the Bach family been around during the early 20th century, it would have been interesting to see if they would have expanded upon their system to allow for a greater amount of unresolved dissonance. As you've seen here, Rameau labels both these instances of 5/1 as perfect cadences. I propose a reimagining of Zarlino's excerpt, here shown in a more Kaplan-esque style of presentation, where we have essentially, and these are just the outer voices, soprano and bass, a 6 tonic substitute, 2/5/1 motion, with this extra cadence treated as an embedded phrase model. Schenker's mysterious 5 reinforces the idea that only the first 5 partials over the overtone series can be used as a model to understand consonant intervals. However, the music of Debussy and Ravel often treat the higher partials as chordal, like a branch with just more leaves. This concept of building up from a given fundamental within each chord is most certainly in line with the foundation that Rameau presents in his treatise. Arnold Schoenberg suggests that all overtones together with the fundamental can be understood as restful and euphonious, needing no resolution. My own suggestion is that harmony can be both horizontal and vertical, with fifth being the first partial capable of generating its own series of partials. The figure I have shown here demonstrates a heritage of each fundamental, with the blue line representing the fifth and its own set of partials as a subset within the red fundamental partial, just as the 9th partial would be then seen as the fifth of the fifth, shown here in green, essentially meaning that all partials created off of one more set of partials, a branch, if you will, starting on the fifth, create an equal line of partials. If you were to isolate any of the fifth's line here and the 9th's line there, or yes, what would be left would be only prime numbers, right? So partials 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 9, no, not 9, sorry, 5, 7, 11, and so on. Only prime numbers would be strictly within the fundamentals line of partials. Everything else could be used with different purposes. For example, if in C major we played a tonic triad containing C, E, G, and add a D natural, it can be either understood as a dissonance needing resolution, say, if it were taking the role of the third partial in a series built off of the fundamentals third partial, G, or it could be at rest, as Schoenberg suggests, acting as the ninth partial of the fundamental series. These distinctions should be made on a case-by-case basis, since it is not clear whether one form or the other is present unless the surrounding material can be observed. For this reason, one must be careful to observe the horizontal possibilities. I've shown here Figured-Bach's explanation of the ninth chord. He demonstrates this as a dissonance held over from the 5, carried over into the 1, which must resolve downward. In this case, the ninth partial is subordinate to the 5th, the third partial. Rameau's approach to explaining the ninth chord is somewhat of a hybrid of both instances previously explained. Instead of justifying an added scale degree 2, or ninth, in the tonic chord, representing the true presence of the ninth partial, Rameau explains ninth chords as simply seventh chords with an added third below, thus allowing what most modern musicians would understand as the third of the chord to function as the fundamental from which the other tones are generated. Notice that Figured-Bach and Rameau remain consistently either horizontal or vertical in their diagrams explaining the ninth chord. Bach with the horizontal and Rameau with the vertical. I'd now like to expand upon the idea of cadence and discuss how that may or may not justify a modulation. This is yet another difference between the theories of Rameau and Figured-Bach. Schenker argues that the idea of modulating to different keys in the works of the master composers is absurd. Instead, he points out the Figured-Bach's treatise and cites his discussion on fantasy. Schenker explains that Bach says a fantasy is called free when it contains no regular distribution of bars and modulates to more keys that is usual in other kinds of pieces, which are either composed or improvised in a regular meter. Schenker is quick to explain Bach's true meaning and proclaims that when Bach speaks, even in such instances of other keys, one must not be deceived by his language. The ground plan of a fantasy adduced by him indicates clearly that by keys, he describes a composing out of scale degrees. In any case, the term is not defined with systematic precision. So according to Schenker's interpretation, Figured-Bach understands tonal music to have one master key, and that all modulation is what we refer to as a tonicization of certain scale degrees. Rameau, on the other hand, is in favor of labeling every tonicization as a modulation. He writes, "The name of the key is determined by the name of this note, which is called the tonic note. This note has the privilege of determining the order of the diatonic intervals, i.e., of the tones and semitones, which should be found between consecutive notes, from this tonic note to its octave. This is known as the modulation." He then explains that using a fixed dose system of solfege syllables, that the function of each note will be established based on which note serves as the tonic. And here I have shown his system based in Do major, where he uses tonic second note, mediant fourth note, dominant tonic, sixth note, and leading tone with the octave to describe the function of each given key or possible key. For Rameau, all modulation consists of these two genres, major and minor, which depend only on the third given to the note taken as tonic. The notes within the octave of the note do can be considered to represent all usable major keys. Therefore, any form of alteration to the function of that note within the octave means that the tonic has therefore moved, changing keys. This way of understanding modulation certainly differs from what Schenker understands of Bach's theory. However, Schenker may have been interpreting Bach's treatise in his own favor. Though Rameau and C.P.E. Bach's theories of tonal harmony differ in significant ways, there is a large amount of their foundation that is in agreement, such as the natural origin of the major third, the major triad, and the interval of the fifth being an essential tool to measure tonal music. Having enjoyed a wide variety of music that could be considered bad music by Schenker, my intention in this presentation has not been to suggest that understanding music in a vertical sense is bad. However, I do believe that understanding counterpoint and the way it can be interpreted at various structural levels remains a crucial part of understanding music in general. The vertical aspect of understanding tonality, in my opinion, can do wonders for understanding the music at face value, aka the foreground. Combining both theories of horizontal and vertical harmony together, that is, the positive products of these traditions, can ultimately create a richly satisfying visual understanding of music, which I show here. Slightly defines my tree-like understanding of tonality. It's been my intention that I continue to hone and craft my own definition of tonality, and studying the differences and similarities in these two treatises has played a vital role in that journey. Thank you very much.